This year's Oscars were fraught with countless controversial nominations and awards that led to a lot of discussion on topics of race, representation, and so much more. This sparked a revival of an age-old discussion about heroes, heroism, and white privilege. For those unfamiliar with what happened in this year's Oscars, Greenbook, the movie about a working-class Italian-American bouncer becoming the driver of an African-American classical pianist on a tour of venues through the 1960s American South, was awarded Best Picture of the Year for 2018. After the Oscars, a few people cried out in opposition to this award, calling the picture out for its white heroism and tokenization of black suffering. The white savior archetype has been around in some form for a long time, as far back as the 700s. Essentially, white savior narratives are stories of white protagonists saving a member or a community of another race from their own condition that they couldn't escape from on their own. This ideology grew along with the spread of Christianity and was evidenced in the Crusades and later the mass colonizations of Africa, Asia, and the Americas. In their time, these stories were created as a means to inspire the people to believe that it was their divine destiny and the will of God to crusade against and destroy opposers of the faith, and to save these other races by asserting their religion and culture upon them. In more modern times, white savior stories have created a different archetype and all follow a similar narrative plot structure. We're typically introduced to a white protagonist who is going about their life when they're introduced to a person of color who's living a life strikingly different from their own. In some cases, the two parties even speak a different language. The protagonist learns that this person of color is up against unsurmountable challenges, most commonly related to the fact that they're different. Then, for the first time, the protagonist experiences some extreme injustice firsthand, realizing that it's the protagonist's own people causing the injustice. The protagonist wrestles with their identity and with whom they ally. They decide that they're going to be the champion of the person of color, and eventually they will be the means by which the person of color is liberated from their suffering. So many of these movies follow this exact narrative. Many of them, however, are based on actual true stories, but these films heavily minimize the role of the person of color, and they flat out get things wrong from the true stories on which they're based. In reference to Greenbook, Dr. Shirley, the wildly brilliant musical genius with multiple doctorates and a champion of race, takes the narrative backseat to the protagonist, his driver. For instance, Maurice Shirley, the brother of the real Dr. Shirley, said of Dr. Shirley's relationship with Tony, the driver in the film, "There was no friendship relationship between Dr. Shirley and Tony. In fact, Dr. Shirley could not stand him. He fired Tony." Or Carol Shirley Kimball, his niece, saying, "The thing that bothers our family is that the focus of the film is all about a white man who is an extreme racist and who was still a racist at the end." Now, taking liberties with the facts of the true story is bad, but it's not terrible. So why are these movies problematic? The first problem is that they allow you as the viewer to look at the racism or injustice in the movie and say, "I'm really glad those days are over," or "those people are terrible," and you feel a little better about how you aren't racist. They allow you to witness the injustice, wrestle with it, and overcome it, leaving the movie feeling like you've done something just by watching the movie. Although there have been many incredible white advocates for civil rights, the white savior stories that get praised and awarded minimize the incredibly powerful stories of people of color suffering and people of color's achievement. So, what's the proper way to tell these important stories where white people have helped people of color in their situation? Number one, it's to at least try and get the details right. Number two, it's to have the people of color as the protagonist. White saviors take up most of the screen time in a story about the oppression of people of color. And typically, people of color in movies only get roles that acknowledge obvious elements of race. Another race-related film from last year was the movie If Beale Street Could Talk, based on the book by James Baldwin. This movie tells the powerful story of a black couple in 1970s Harlem, in which Alonzo is seen to be wrongfully convicted and jailed for a crime he didn't commit. In an effort to solve this injustice, the heroes of the story get help from a white lawyer named Hayward. Hayward plays his role. Hayward definitely helps them, and he isn't understated or overstated as a character, and his role remains true to the original story. The movie doesn't leave you feeling like racism was solved in 90 minutes, or that these problems don't exist anymore. It brings you close to the problems, it makes them your own, and allows you to almost empathize with the people it's affecting. Hopefully, it makes you a little more introspective of your own situation and what privileges you may or may not enjoy. When the reality of America today is one where racial inequalities are still a daily thing, maybe we should reevaluate the narratives we're telling and who we're telling them about.